In Pearl Square in Manama, where 7 anti-government protesters were killed earlier this month. Friday was declared a national day of mourning for the dead. Officials say 3 ministers who caused crisis have been dismissed. AlJazeera has obtained pictures of what appears to be police firing at protesters in the Iraqi city of Fallujah. Across Iraq, demonstrations against corruption and the lack of basic services have turned deadly. Jane Araf now.
These were determined protesters. They came from all over the city, walking for hours to get to Liberation Square. Cars were banned across Baghdad, and the Green Zone, home to the Iraqi government and the U.S. Embassy, entirely sealed off during the night.
They've closed off all the key bridges around here. The government says it's to protect the protesters. The protesters say it's actually to protect the bridge.
And the bridge protects the Green Zone, a symbol now of government isolation. Iraqi riot police clashed with a small group of young men throwing rocks, sticks, and even shoes. Some tried to get past the new concrete barriers. As the police surged forward, wielding batons and later water cannons, people ran to get away. Several protesters were injured. A lot of the young men were furious at a government they feel has given them nothing. Other groups kept arriving at the square. Peaceful, this group of clerics counseled. One activist said it was time to take back the Green Zone.
If we can cross the bridge, if we can reach to the Green Zone and tell them it's not theirs anymore, it's for the people, this was the dream. And we were still hoping to make it through.
In the southern city of Basra, demonstrators, furious at continued poverty and lack of jobs, reached the Basra governorate building to call for the removal of the governor. It prompted his resignation. And in the city of Fallujah and Al-Anbar, demonstrators set fire to other government buildings. The spark of protests expected to spread further among Iraqis. They insist it's time they get a share of what the government has. Jane Araf, AlJazeera, Baghdad.
Well, we'll return to that top story, the uprising in Libya, after the break. Plus, we'll have the rest of the world's news, including the latest from New Zealand, where violent aftershocks are shaking the shattered city of Christchurch. And it's high-five time in Ireland from the party leader who urged voters to turn their anger into action over the busted economy.
We do accept that there was very bad mistakes made in our banking area.
Behind the headlines,
most South Koreans are not interested in reunification.
Is the inside story at this time on AlJazeera.
If you're a Nokia user, you can download AlJazeera's news widget from Nokia's Ovi store. The news widget, available on compatible Nokia devices, gives users quick and easy access to real-time news updates from AlJazeera English. See the world in real time. AlJazeera Mobile.
Homes have crumbled and many buildings have been left just empty shells.
Tensions are high. Riot police trying to control thousands of Greek protesters on the streets of Athens.
A British court has approved the go-ahead for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to be extradited.
The Gaddafi is waging a war against the Libyan people. They are killing civilians mercilessly. They're using ammunition, live ammunition.
Welcome back. Let's recap the very latest of what's going on in Libya. The country's leader has turned up at a pro-government rally in the capital Tripoli, defiant as ever, promising to fight to defend his position. Defiance too from the demonstrators, some of whom faced another violent crackdown, and there are reports of yet more deaths. All this prompting an impassioned plea at the UN by the Libyan ambassador there for the killings to stop. An appeal echoed by the United Nations chief himself. Sanctions have now been slapped on Gaddafi's government by NATO and the US. Well, details are now emerging of what those sanctions will be. The Obama administration plans to freeze assets held by the Libyan leader and 4 of his children inside the U.S. All American banks have been put on notice for a sudden movement of funds from Libya. And all U.S. military assistance to the North African country will now be cut off. Let's get more now from Ashraf Tulti. He's the Executive Director of Justice and Democracy for Libya. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us. Let's start with the sanctions which are being hammered out in a session in the Security Council today. Does the draft go far enough?
Well, the way I see it, in my own opinion, imposing sanctions, they're going to affect the Libyan people. And the Libyan people have been victims for the past 42 years. We've been through sanctions in the past. Sanctions do not work against the regime. Sanctions, the regime can manipulate them. They can create havoc in the country and can really hurt the people. We do want an immediate UN intervention by sending their troops to save the lives of the Libyan people. And we also need human rights groups who can go there, empower the people, and look at the violations the people being through and the ongoing atrocities and the massacres that we are experiencing on a daily basis by the various videos and various photos we've been receiving since the revolution erupted.
You're calling for UN troops to go in, but do you think it's likely that Security Council members will want to commit to that on Saturday?
We hope so. I mean, what are they waiting for? To get more thousands of victims killed? Civilian demonstrators, peaceful people asking for democracy, rule of law, constitutional democracy. This is illegitimate. We cannot stop the history.
All right, what about moves or the idea to refer the killings in Libya to the International Criminal Court?
Absolutely, the International Criminal Court is a very important tool, and we also have Mr. Hadi Challouf is a member. He's a Libyan French lawyer. He has very good connections inside Libya. All over Libya, people send him documents, call him. He is the closest person right now to get involved in this. Actually, maybe he will be willing to go there and start this criminal court process.
All right, Ashraf Tulti, once again, thanks for your thoughts. Well, earlier we heard from the Libyan envoy to the UN as he threw his support behind the protesters back home. But he wasn't the only diplomat from this country to turn his back on Gaddafi and condemn his one-time boss. Nick Spicer reports.
It was a rare special session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, an emergency meeting, and the first ever devoted to a country that is still a member. Libya, absent at the start of the day.
Libya holds one of the 47 seats on the Human Rights Council. In its application for membership, it said it was fully committed to the protection of human rights, which includes the right to direct participation in public life.
A broken pledge. The other country's criticism was relentless.
I think it tells us what we all see on our television screens, that there is a sense of revulsion and outrage as to what's been going on in Libya over the last few days.
The Libyan authorities are violating the universal rights of their own people, and the international community needs to stand up and speak with one voice in solidarity with the people of Libya.
It was all beginning to feel a bit routine when came the surprise. A Libyan diplomat turned up to say he and his colleagues working in Geneva now no longer served the Libyan government, but the Libyan people. The Libyan diplomats here were not alone. Ambassadors to France and UNESCO also resigned on Friday. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, present at Friday's session, said it was an historic moment.
It was very, very moving to hear the speech of the Deputy Ambassador of Libya here in Geneva, who first recited verses from the Quran, all of which supports the position that what the ruler of Libya is doing is totally unacceptable in accordance with Islamic values and traditions, which respects the rights of people, which respects democracy and justice.
At the end of the session, delegates decided to order an international investigation into events in Libya. That could lead to prosecutions for war crimes or crimes against humanity. Nick Spicer, Al Jazeera, Geneva.
In Tunisia, there's been a so-called day of rage against the interim government. Thousands of demonstrators demanded the resignation of former loyalists to the ousted president. Al Jazeera's James Bays is in the capital.
There are thousands of people here. It's estimated this is the biggest protest in Tunisia since Ben Ali was forced to flee from this country. People here say that the protests have moved to other countries, the protests that were first started here in Tunisia, and in some ways they feel that this country has been forgotten. They say their revolution is an unfinished one.
We are here because we believe that the dictator has gone, but dictatorship is still here. The system of dictatorship is still ruling right now.
If Ghannouchi is still here, because that means Ben Ali is here also. We are all way again in injustice. We are suffer again because Ghannouchi is the same like Ben Ali.
You got rid of Ben Ali. Tell me why you are still protesting.
Because the system is the same. Nothing has changed. The dictator is gone, but dictatorship is still here.
It's now some 6 weeks since Ben Ali was forced to leave this country. The protests after he left were relatively small, people unhappy with the Prime Minister Ghannouchi. Well, now those protests are growing again. This is the largest protest in Tunisia since the fall of Ben Ali, and it shows you that even though the world's attention is now on Libya, in some of those countries that have already had revolution, things are far from over. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Tunis.
After controversy over how she handled the crisis in Tunisia, latest reports from France say the foreign minister is set to resign. Michel Alliot-Marie accepted flights in a business jet owned by a supporter of the ousted Tunisian president. Unnamed French ministers have been quoted as saying she could be replaced by the defence minister Alain Juppé. Well, there's been a high turnout for the general election in Ireland, where the governing Fianna Fáil party is braced for humiliation. A voter backlash is expected after the boom-to-bust economic collapse and the $90 billion bailout, which Irish taxpayers are now saddled with for a long time to come. From Dublin, Rory Challens.
Enda Kenny is a man with every right to feel like he's going places. He cast his vote on Friday knowing the polls point to him as Ireland's next leader.
This is probably